Hey, it's 1911. You're getting ready to sail on a lovely voyage from Cherbourg to New York in a stunning second-class stateroom aboard the brand-new ocean liner RMS Olympic. You just can't wait to get home to your family in rural Arkansas and brag about how you just sailed aboard the largest ship on the ocean. The voyage is sublime, the weather is clear, the crew is friendly, and you can't imagine anything ever going wrong on board. You arrive in New York to see a newly greened Statue of Liberty and leave 5 stars on Yelp for your voyage. Would recommend. You come home to find out your wife is pregnant and you're getting that promotion. Everything is right in the world. A year passes. You find out about the new sister of the Olympic, the Titanic, and see it's supposedly bigger, fancier, and captained by the same guy from the first voyage. After a wonderful experience the first time, you schedule to return to Europe for vacation on board Titanic when it arrives in America. But for whatever reason, the morning you arrive in New York to leave for your voyage in a few days, you see newspapers everywhere saying Titanic sinks, massive loss of life. Oh no! White Star Line has got to do something about it, and the owner of the line, Law and Order candidate Joseph Bruce Ismay, is in mountains of court inquiries. You decide to put off your voyage until a few years after the whole thing is blown over, and certainly not on the White Star Line. You think a trip on the Cunarder RMS Lusitania for early May of 1915 sounds pretty sweet. Your wife, however, says she'll never sail on another ocean liner until they can make him safer. Women, am I right? In the 1910s, ships were getting bigger and seemingly safer. Look at those 4 funnels. Beauty like that has to be divine. With all these big ships, the one thing few people were thinking of was safety. The sinking of Titanic really put into perspective how far ships had come, as even in calm waters, a massive vessel foundered with a huge loss of life. The primary reason for this massive loss of life was simply a lack of lifeboats. Even early on, the lack of lifeboats on Olympic class was a genuine concern for White Star Line, and General Manager Alexander Carlisle even tried giving the class 64 lifeboats instead of the minuscule 16. It did have 4 collapsible ones, though. Had the line listened, the loss of life would have been far less drastic. Titanic taught White Star Line and the industry a very important lesson. Safety accommodations must take priority. The lack of lifeboats in the past was for a few reasons, but one of the weirder ones was for vanity's sake. They thought ships would look too cluttered. To their credit, this wasn't entirely the reason for the lack of lifeboats, but now that they'd seen the inevitable consequence of their mistake, the people, and the court, wouldn't rest until safety accommodations improved. White Star Line took this very seriously, and they didn't want the reputation of their newest Olympic-class liner tarnished by Titanic's fate. They were going to make sure she was safe as all hell, and that ship just so happened to be the RMS Gigantic. And then they finalized the name to RMS Britannic. 2. Named for a previous White Star liner. Harland and Wolff still deny that it was ever called Gigantic, though, so... She looks awfully similar to the rest of her class, but there's a lot more change in there than it seems. The Titanic had a 92-foot beam, while Britannic had a 94-foot beam. Big things happening in the nautical world. Another more significant change was giving her a double hull along her boilers and engine rooms, which also would increase her overall weight, making her larger. Didn't Titanic have a double hull? Well, yes, but not really. It had a double bottom, meaning it could sustain a crash like the Subic endured, but the sides of the ship were very exposed. Britannic added this double hull to the sides around her boiler and engine rooms. Britannic wasn't going to take any risks. They also raised Britannic's watertight doors to have some go all the way up to B deck instead of D deck, which was the highest point on Titanic and Olympic's bulkheads. Also, to White Star's credit, they refitted Olympic with a lot of these changes too, even raising her watertight doors where they could. They also gave Britannic another watertight bulkhead in the electric engine room, which brought her to a total of 17 compartments, 1 more than the rest of her class. Another safety feature that is far more visibly implemented is the massive gantry davits, which is a fancy way of saying lifeboat crane. White Star implemented an intricate system of these thingies in order to store more lifeboats to accommodate all passengers. It was pretty effective, even if it wasn't aesthetically flawless. Each crane was capable of launching 6 lifeboats, and 8 davits were meant to be installed, even if only 5 ever were. They also had decent maneuverability and could move far out from the ship, so even if it listed, they could still be launched from both sides. She had 48 lifeboats, each capable of carrying 75 persons. Persons? Why not people? And unlike her sisters, there would be lifeboat davits on the very stern of the ship, thus making third class a little less uneasy in having to rush to the boat deck. Her aft shelter deck was enclosed too, giving her another difference to Olympic and giving third class passengers a little more covered space to hang out. With that, the third class smoking room was moved above the general room to make the stern look bigger. That's no joke. That's one of the genuine reasons. Now, her last change of significance was when they changed up her motor a bit and gave her an 18,000 horsepower central propeller turbine instead of a lousy 16,000 horsepower one. Moving on. Now her accommodations are where it's at, still exemplifying the luxury of the Olympic class. And now she has a 3,309 person capacity instead of Titanic's 3,327 people. Not a huge difference, but given how similar these ships were, that's a sign that some significant change happened between the last liner and the newest addition to the fleet. This change also included a small open deck portion on D deck, a small addition just below the aft well deck. I think that covers most of it. One notable change was that unlike Titanic, the Britannic had no Café Parisien, and she had more elevators than Titanic, or at least she was planned to. Her second class was given a gymnasium, and more rooms were given private lavatories. There were some other changes here and there, but you've got to be sick of hearing me rant about lifeboats and elevators, so let's move on. She rucked 3 propellers, 2 with 3 blades, the middle one with 4, and could run a max speed of 23 knots. She totaled in at quote-unquote completion at 48,158 gross registered tons. Due to the new German superliner SS Vaterland, she was the only vessel of her class not to be the largest in the world. The Britannic was launched on February 26, 1914. Effortlessly sliding from her blocks with a little help of 20 tons of train oil, tallow, and soap. After being towed into Belfast, Britannic awaited completion, which unfortunately turned out to be a slow and tedious process. See, usually it only takes a few months to half a year for a vessel to be completed, but Britannic wouldn't be fitted out well into 1915. This wasn't only a testament to her enormous size, the primary reason for such a long wait was the financial trouble of the International Mercantile Marine Company, which had been going through a bit of a rough patch since the sinking of Titanic. During this period, she sometimes went weeks without any work done on her. IMMC had the unfortunate fate of needing Britannic in service badly, but also not being able to pay off debt to Harland & Wolff in order to complete her. Britannic's maiden voyage was delayed to spring of 1915, way later than initially planned. Ultimately, however, it wouldn't matter, as something sparked in Europe that summer of 1914. The British government advised all shipping lines to stop doing routes for fear of German U-boats. Britannic and Olympic would sit in Belfast for 10 months, Britannic particularly taking paint damage as a result of no upkeep. The White Star Line sat waiting for their heavenly liners, one not even completed, to be taken up by the government and drafted into military service, a process called requisitionment. She was to have her fine furnishings placed in storage as she was converted into a hospital ship. The incredibly successful Gallipoli campaign was going incredibly well, until it wasn't. And now the Admiralty needed hospital ships to assist with the enormous amount of casualties. She was repainted into the internationally recognized hospital ship color scheme, which can I just say she looks absolutely incredible. It's drip she was designed to sport. Now because she wasn't entirely completed, the Admiralty had to take this fixer-upper and make her a war-ready ship in only 4 weeks. Seeing that only 5 of her gantry davits were installed, they added 6 traditional Welland davits to her boat deck in order to fill out her lifeboat capacity. They also converted her interior to accommodate 3,309 people, who would mostly be wounded soldiers. For instance, her first-class dining rooms were transformed into operating theaters and medical wards. Her long common rooms were now filled to the brim with cots and hospital beds. At the very stern of the ship, a morgue was added too. There's a little fact for my goth fans out there. Now, being a troop transport ship was dangerous business. You could be attacked at any moment by a German submarine or warship, and it would be entirely legal. Olympic had thus become a prime target, and White Star was getting a bit nervous. Britannic, however, was spared this fate because there are a few unnoticed benefits of being a hospital ship. Due to some convention in the 1800s, hospital ships are now not legally able to be attacked when carrying out their duty in Red Cross colors. The only condition is that they can't discriminate and must service wounded enemy troops too. They also can't be used for any purpose of transporting weapons, troops, and can't be used as attack vessels. Britannic could meet these requirements and did so pretty well, and being immune to enemy attacks sounds pretty dang nice. Keep in mind, however, the Germans were not exactly renowned for following international law. Regardless, the Britannic was fitted out in her hospital colors and began her all-too-short career. Her first journey was to Mudros in Greece, tasked with picking up the wounded and then getting the hell out. On this journey, she was accompanied on the route by the Olympic, Aquitania, Mauretania, and later the Stadendam. Can you imagine being there with 5 oceanic legends sailing all at once? They of course weren't all together like ducks in a row, but that's still pretty cool. She spent 4 weeks in the Isle of Wight as a floating hospital before serving 2 more voyages to the Mediterranean. What's interesting is that we actually have the daily schedule of her crew available to us, starting at 6 a.m. when her patients were awoken and her crew began cleaning up the ship. Breakfast was served at 6:30, and then patients were given free time to rest or walk while the captain inspected the ship. Lunch was at 12:30 and tea was at 4:30 for some reason, and then lights out at 8:30 while the captain did another inspection. Neat stuff. After her first 3 voyages as a hospital ship, she was given back to White Star Line to be finished and converted back into a commercial ocean liner. What a splendid little journey she ran. Fortunately, now she can rest easy again in the hands of White. Oh, seriously? White Star seemed to be a little low on their luck in August of 1916, as the Britannic was requisitioned once again. I know it sounds like the feds just yoinked the ships out of the hands of the companies, but in all fairness, the British government paid to use the vessels. She ran another route to the Dardanelles to assist in the dumpster fire that was the Gallipoli campaign, and then returned home after a brief stop in Naples. She made her 5th voyage in October, and after her crew was hit with a slight case of the sick, she made it all the way back up to Southampton unscathed. She had a pretty dang good track record so far. How will they mess it up? On November 12, 1916, Britannic departed on what would be her final voyage, this time to the island of Limnos in Greece. She passed through the Strait of Gibraltar at midnight on the 15th and arrived in Naples 2 days later, the Detroit of Italy. She was recoaled and restocked, and after waiting out a brief storm, she rounded the Strait of Messina and made it to the Aegean Sea on the 20th. On the morning of November 21, 1916 at 8:12, a major explosion on her starboard side erupted. Her captain, Charles Bartlett, soon realized the gravity of the situation and ordered all watertight doors to be closed. He had good intentions, but he wasn't entirely aware of 2 things that would contribute to the rapid sinking. Firstly, the nurses had opened numerous portholes along the hull of the ship to bring in better ventilation, technically already breaking standing orders from the captain by doing so. Second, the explosion happened in the dead center of watertight bulkhead A, meaning now it was not only warped and unusable, it also meant water would flood into compartments 2 and 3. The first bulkhead was also damaged, meaning the forward peak would flood too. 4 watertight compartments were now flooding. The tunnel leading to Boiler Room 6 from the stoker's quarters was also flooding. And to add insult to injury, bulkhead E wasn't closing properly, meaning compartments 5 and 6 were flooding too. Couldn't Britannic last with at least 6 compartments flooded? Well, yes, but due to the open portholes, water spilled in all the way up to B deck and flooded over the watertight bulkheads. Not to mention, she could only stay afloat with 6 full if she was stationary. Her captain still had her running, hoping to beach her. The final stroke of bad luck given to Britannic was that the explosion knocked out her steering gear, meaning that beaching her would now be all the more difficult, as Captain Bartlett had to use the port and starboard shafts to direct the ship. Water began spilling into the open portholes on the aft section of the ship as she sank down to E-deck, and a serious list to starboard soon became evident. A distress signal was sent out and received by British ships in the area, but unbeknownst to Bartlett, the explosion had snapped the antenna wires between the masts, meaning the messages could be sent but not received. Bartlett had ordered lifeboats to be swung out very soon after the explosion, and with the severe list becoming worse, the crew began launching the first lifeboat against the orders of the captain. This lifeboat was sucked in and ground up by the propellers along with its occupants. The second lifeboat met the same fate. With it, the captain ordered the engines to stop. After 35 lifeboats had been launched, the captain briefly restarted the engines, hoping to beach the ship. It would be in vain, as water was nearly at the bridge. The abandoned ship order was given, and Britannic slowly listed until her funnels collapsed and she sank bow first into the sea. Interestingly, the Britannic was longer than the sea was deep, meaning when the bow hit the seabed, her stern was still out of the water. I now have to tell the tale of Violet Jessup, a stewardess and a Titanic survivor who also survived the HMS Hawk collision on board Olympic. Jessup was in a lifeboat headed straight for the spinning propeller, and recognizing her impending fate, jumped the lifeboat before it was sucked in and destroyed. She was pulled in by the propellers, but miraculously flew clear of them. She hit her head on a lifeboat but was recovered and survived the disaster, meaning she survived all 3 disasters of all 3 Olympic-class liners. A stoker named Arthur John Preece also survived all 3 incidents too. Both of them are mentioned in my dated Olympic video. Britannic's passengers were first helped by some lovely Greek fishermen, and soon after the HMS Scourge and HMS Heroic arrived at the scene. The HMS Foxhound was the last ship to help, taking on the final survivors, and with it the casualties were totaled at 35 deaths and 1,035 survivors. Many casualties were from the lifeboat mishaps, and the survivors were fortunate enough to be in 68-degree Fahrenheit weather, not 28 degrees like the Titanic. Today, the Britannic remains the largest passenger shipwreck on the sea floor, and her legacy is too often forgotten by the general public. Even White Star used the name Britannic for another one of their ships, pretty much putting the disaster in the past to be forgotten. That vessel, the MV Britannic, would become White Star's final functioning ocean liner. Today, interest in the wreck of HMHS Britannic has spiked, as her close proximity to the surface means divers have easy access to her than, say, Titanic. The water pressure is also significantly lower than Titanic's wreck site, meaning the Britannic remains in much better shape. Now, what exactly sank Britannic? Now, most believe it was a German sea mine laid by SMU-73, but some speculate it was a torpedo. Germany has committed war crimes in the past, but deliberately sinking a hospital ship seems like a bit much. I wouldn't exactly put it below the Kaiserlich Marine, however. Now, I know I made a video about the Olympic already, but I figured the Olympic class wouldn't lay to rest until I covered them all, which only leaves This should be interesting. Well, what did we learn? If your vessel is sinking, sometimes you gotta know when to give the abandoned ship signal. If you wait on meaningless hope, it will only hurt more of your crew. Keep in mind, though, the Germans were absolutely not well renowned for knowing international law. Keep in mind, however, the Germans were absolutely not renowned. Keep in mind, however, the Germans were not Keep in mind, however, the Germans were not renowned for being. Keep in mind, however, the Germans were not exactly renowned for following international law.